What's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to some Lost in the Pond, and the video is 6 ways British and American driving is very different. And I mean, I think you couldn't get more different in terms of things between the country. Driving is probably up there as one of the main things, because in so many aspects, for starters, the side of the road you drive on, the side of the car that you drive on, but then the length of the roads, the distances you travel, all these things. But there's probably other things that I don't know. I'm not a driver, right? So I don't know details of driving, but things like getting your license, or pay, like you have to pay tax to drive on the roads in the UK. I'm sure that's the same in the US as well. You have to pay to basically drive, and I'm assuming that's the same in both places. But these sorts of comparisons we're gonna see, I guess. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's just jump into this video. Hopefully you're going to enjoy. Links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more of my reactions. But let's jump into this and see the ways this is different.
It's, if you've ever seen those country roads in the United Kingdom, I think half of American cars wouldn't be able to fit. They'd have to cut through the fields and potentially kill hundreds of cows, you know, bringing it back to South Dakota.
What?
Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to driving. I think it's a well-known fact that driving etiquette and just driving practices in general are different on either side of the pond. But how are they different? Having lived in the United States now for 11 years, I'm here to tell you, even though I don't drive. From the driving test right through to the cars themselves and, you know, the side of the road that we drive on, as well as the words that we use to describe car things, it just goes to show that Britain and America are two nations divided by a common median/central reserve. Now, before we get underway, you may be thinking, why should I take any information on this matter from somebody who doesn't drive? Well, the truth of the matter is, I did try to learn to drive, actually, here in the United States, so I have experience of that. I have no experience back in England, but I've seen cars, nearly got killed by one once. I was on my bike. You didn't need to know that.
Wait, so you failed your test? I've not even failed yet. I've just not taken it, so I'm probably even worse, to be honest. I'm not a car person. The idea of just putting your lives in the risks of someone else on the road, it just worries me, man. I get anxiety just thinking about it. Although I know 99% of the time it's going to be fine. You're going to be fine. There's just... I'm an overthinker, and that's something that just stops me from wanting to drive. Even though I would love to be able to drive, it's just like, I'm just thinking to myself, do I want to risk anything when I can just walk or bike or get the bus or... Yeah, I don't know.
And so, without further ado, let's take a look at 6 ways that Britain and America's car culture is very, very different. Okay, so before we get into the good stuff, a little bit about how people acquire their licenses in both countries. In the United Kingdom, where I'm from, you can get a full license at the age of 17, but until then, as soon as you apply for one...
I didn't even know that until I was 18. I was in college with people, and there was this kid who was... I think he'd just turned 17 in my class, and he was driving around. I was like, what the how are you driving? And then I realized, oh, you can get a license at 17. But I was just so baffled.
You have to have a provisional license until you pass your driving test. These provisional licenses can be acquired from the age of 15 years and 9 months, very specific. Whereas in the United States, this actually varies from state to state. And they don't really call that pre-license a provisional license, but a restricted driver's license. And notice, of course, the difference between driving license and driver's license, and the spelling of license. Now, like I said, it does differ from state to state. In South Dakota, for example, you can acquire one of these restricted licenses from the age of 14 years and 3 months.
What? 14?
And that's issued by a department called the South Dakota Department of Public Safety. But, you know, to be fair, South Dakota is one of the 5 least densely populated states in the nation. So it's the cows that I worry for. Now, that's kind of an extreme example. And in any case, when we're talking about passing your driver's test and getting your full unrestricted license, that will happen anywhere from the age of 16 to 18, depending on the state. Now, in Britain, a driving test consists of 3 sections. You've got your theory exam, your hazard perception exam, and then your supervised driving exam. Now, in the United States, or at least Indiana, where I took lessons, I was taught by a combination of my wife and my grandfather-in-law, who to this very day remain among the bravest people I've ever known. But to even get to the point of taking those driving lessons, I had to take a written test, which was easy. I didn't even revise for it. It was mostly common sense stuff. And I had to have an eye test as well, just to make sure that I could see things. And once I passed the written test and the eye test with flying colours, hazel mainly, I was then given a learner's permit, or was it a restricted licence? I'm confused about that. But something was given to me and I was able to drive around parking lots for a bit. Never passed the test, and now that I live in Chicago, don't really need to. But I've been in the passenger seat on many an occasion, including one where we crashed. Probably didn't help that I never took driving lessons in the UK, but even if I had, I might have been even more confused, particularly because of the next difference. I think it goes without saying, mostly because most people are aware of this, that Britain and America definitely drive on different sides of the road. Indeed, I've heard British people say, why do Americans drive on the wrong side of the road? But I don't think the burden of accountability...
But how does this even happen? Why is it... I guess, India, British colony maybe? Australia, British colony. But, why do some parts... it doesn't make sense why it's just swapped around some places. We're the only place in Europe and Ireland that drive on this side of the road, but then the rest of the... I mean, in terms of population, it's probably India makes up for most of it. Probably 1,000, nearly 2 billion maybe, altogether. Actually, no, maybe a bit more than 2 billion compared to 6 billion. But it's just fascinating. Why is this part of the world the same as us, but then why is there... Oh, it's so weird.
...lies with Americans. Indeed, like the United States, the majority of the planets, not including oceans, drive on the right. Because of this, of course, America has the steering wheel on the left, Britain has kept theirs on the right. But this was not always the case, at least in terms of American cars and American roads. Before the 1908 launch of the Ford Motor Company's Model T, virtually every car in America placed the steering wheel on the right. In fact, Ford only made that change to make it easier for people entering on the passenger side to avoid oncoming traffic. Until this, though, long after a law was passed in 1792 mandating that vehicles, horse buggies and the like, must travel along the right side of the road, it was widely accepted that steering should take place on the right. Evidence of this can still be found today, in fact, in Amish communities where horse buggies are sometimes steered in this manner. When mass production of American cars began in the late 19th century, it was widely viewed that right-hand steering was the preferred method, since, it had evidently worked out just fine for the journeymen of yesteryear. However, by the turn of the century, motor companies began looking for innovative new ways to sell their latest product. Cadillac introduced the first lever-operated headlights, while the Marmon Motor Company is believed to have pioneered the use of a rear-view mirror in 1911, and so it was that Ford introduced left-hand steering in 1908. Because it was later seen that left-hand steering was conducive to safer driving, since it was easier for the driver to judge his or her proximity to oncoming traffic, this new way of steering became virtually standardized by the mid-1910s, and has remained thus to this very day. But there is one United States territory that has bucked the trend, and that's the United States Virgin Islands. There, they drive on the left despite the fact that the steering wheels are also on the left. It must be chaos.
What the why?
Who knows? I've not tried it, but maybe one day. Now, whether you drive on the right or the left, there's no disputing which country has the most cars. When it comes to car ownership, Britain cannot hold a candle to the United States. And that probably makes sense for reasons that I've outlined before. We have a fairly well-connected rail system across the entire country. That's something that the United States does not really boast. And in Britain, most towns and cities do have a fairly comprehensive bus system. So you don't always have to drive to work, for example, or to your kid's sports day. If you take the bus, you've got an excuse if you're late. America is a wide open country. Not everywhere has great public transportation. And add to that, the popularity around cars is just a big part of American culture. Certainly has been since the 20th century. And so these reasons perhaps account for why there are only 471 cars in Britain for every 1,000 people. I say only, that probably sounds like a lot, but that number includes children in the population. So if you just eradicate children, not literally, just in this scenario, then, that number is going to be quite a lot higher. But it probably still wouldn't reach America's number of cars per person, even if you include American children in this. Some of whom, of course, South Dakota knows all about that.
Yeah.
Because in the United States, there are 838 cars for every 1,000 people. Now, certain states in America do have a disproportionate stranglehold on this very stat. Take, for example, the state of Wyoming. There are more cars per capita in that state than any other state in the nation. There are, in fact, 1,100 cars for every 1,000 people.
That makes sense, though, because it's so far from everything you need to be able to drive. It's a necessity to drive when you live in Wyoming. or somewhere like that, where it's just so far, especially small towns and stuff.
One of 7 states in the Union where cars outnumber people. And then there's car production as well. The United States is the second highest producer of automobiles in the entire world behind China, and it's certainly way ahead of Britain. And so much for the number of cars. What about the amount of miles we're actually driving? Well, the United States absolutely kicks Britain's arse on that one. A 2010 study found that British people on average drive about 6,500 miles a year, which, if you do the mathematics on that, that's about 18 miles a day, which that sounds like a lot to me. But that's nothing compared to the United States, because Americans on average are doing twice that amount each year. The average American drives about 13,000 miles a year, which is about 36 miles a day. That sounds like hell, and I know that it is because I used to drive from Anderson to Indianapolis and back. You're talking there about 40 miles, so that was about 80 miles a day I used to do. That was routine. I knew a lot of people that were doing that, and that's not the only commute route, of course, of that size in the United States. And yet again, these numbers could be swayed by certain states out west. Take, for example, Wyoming again. 21,821 miles per capita per year driven by the folks of Wyoming. It is number one.
So much driving. That'll take up so much time.
In the nation yet again. And that's about 60 miles a day. So, I mean, this is the state of Wyoming where there are only 2 escalators in the entire state. They're used to doing things the hard way.
Sizing up.
It's official. There are no two ways about this. American cars, and you can quote me on this, American cars are approximately massive. For once, I don't really have any statistics to back this up. It's observational fact. In the US, you have chunky SUVs.
I mean, I'll be honest, I don't ever see cars this big. Very rarely will I see anything close to this, but you don't see cars as big because the streets are just too small in the grand scheme of things. So many streets here are just too thin. And also how it is, right? You'll have the streets, but then cars park, because there's not really, in like the city that I live now, unless you've got money or you live in an area where there's a lot more space, cars will just be parked up on the sidewalk pretty much. So, I mean, there's not really going to be, the roads already aren't massive, and then you've got to consider both sides of the road, the cars are parked up outside of each of people's homes. So there's even less space on the road. So it's like, yeah, this is not going to flipping work in a country like this. But in the US, I guess, it's the streets are so much bigger, and yeah, people can just have bigger cars.
These massive 4x4 trucks and those big family vans that hold up to 287 children. In Britain, you have the hatchback. All that to say that cars are just smaller in the United Kingdom. I mean, most things are, right? The roads are smaller, so we have smaller cars and we have fewer people using them in general. Here, those 4x4 trucks that Marty covets in Back to the Future and eventually gets are fairly common here. You've probably seen them. They're usually owned by people who think they own the roads. If you've ever seen those country roads in the United Kingdom, I think half of American cars wouldn't be able to fit. They'd have to cut through the fields and potentially kill hundreds of cows, bringing it back to South Dakota. Of course, they're less likely to do that if drivers have a better understanding of signage.
There's
a big difference when it comes to road signs, and that's partly because in Britain we conform largely to European standards and Americans, weirdly, don't. I'm being stupid on purpose, just enjoy it, but that's why British signs around the country are very similar to what you might find in, say, France or Germany and the like, except, without kilometres. We have miles, despite being metric, and our signs are in English, unless you're in Wales, where they're written in consonants. And in the United States, there is adherence to the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. This is chiefly federal guidance on road signage, but there are some states, 8 in fact, that go by their own state's version of what the signage should be. So depending on the state you're in, the signage could be different. So do look out for that if you're ever moving here, or even if you just live here already and you're traveling to another state. And then some states, you know who you are, have a combination of both state and federal regulations. That is called sitting on the fence. Now, quick caveat here, when it comes to US and British signage, it's not all entirely different. Take, for example, the stop sign. They're almost identical. Same with no entry and give way, except in the United States, it's called yield. Fine, but what about some of the millions of signs that are completely different? Here's a very, very, very brief sample of some of those that you might come into contact with. So our interchange road signs employ different colours and...
But to be honest, this is a lot easier to look at. You look at this, there's so many things that it shows up. You're going to be confused if you're like new to the road. Obviously, people have sat navs and all that sort of stuff now, but this definitely is a lot more just easy to just follow the whatever you wanted to get. If you wanted to get here, it's just easier to follow and all that. But all of this fits on here. It's just like, come on now, I'm trying to drive.
And just different markings in general. No parking signs. This is very important. Take a look. They are quite different in colour and in just appearance in general. This is your speed limit right here compared to the United States. And not only do train crossing signs differ from country to country, but in the United States, they usually use the word railroad crossing, and the sign looks like this. And as somebody who doesn't drive, the no pedestrian signs are the ones I look out for, and they are quite markedly different. There are some funny ones too.
So what I'm noticing, the US likes the wording. The UK likes the pictures. The pictures are sort of prominent in no matter what, but in the US, the wording is what they look for.
Allowed. That's true in both the United Kingdom, in parts of the United Kingdom, and in Pennsylvania.
Tank crossing? I just clocked what that is. What the fuck?
Basically, there's an absolute plethora of signage differences. I only scratched the surface there. But getting all of them into this video would have been an uphill struggle. I only said that so I could get that sign in there. And actually, while we're on the subject of wordplay, that brings us on to our final entry.
Words.
There are a staggering number of terminological differences to do with automobiles between the United States and the United Kingdom. This is partially because, of course, both countries devise their rules and regulations around the roads independently of each other. But, and this is by no means an exhaust, list, here are the key differences. Alright, in British English you have bonnet, in American English you have hood, you have boot instead of trunk, bumper instead of also bumper but maybe sometimes fender, car park instead of parking lot, central reserve instead of median, crossroads instead of four-way
Four-way stop? I've never heard that term in my life, obviously, but I thought I'd have seen it mentioned in videos.
Stop, curve instead of bend, driving licence instead of driver's licence, dual carriageway instead of divided highway or freeway, gear stick instead of gear shift or shifter, give way instead of yield, indicator instead of turn signal or blinker, lorry or truck, whereas in the US it's usually just truck. The generalised British term motorway can encompass anything from expressway to highway to interstate to freeway.
God, there's a lot of words for that.
You've got motorway services area, or simply services, which equates in the United States to rest area or rest stop or travel plaza. You have pavement versus sidewalk, petrol cap versus gas cap, petrol station versus gas station, roundabout versus also roundabout but maybe rotary or traffic circle. You have windscreen instead of windshield and zebra crossing instead of crosswalk. And with that, we've hit the red light on this video. That was a reference to the stoplight on traffic lights, not the dodgy area of Amsterdam. There's plenty more to say on this subject.
Dodgy area. I want to go there one day. I'm joking. If in the US we don't always know how far, but we almost always know how long it takes to get there. Driving in Ireland was one of the scariest experiences of my life. For anyone who has to drive there or in the UK, you have both my sympathies and utmost respect. See, this is why I don't think driving here is even fun. It's just hard, man. It's harder here than it is in the US because the roads are just so much bigger. The difference between Brits and Americans is that Brits think 100 miles is a long way. I always see the saying, man. I'm bored of this saying. I always see the saying. And Americans think it's 100 years is a long time. Come on. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. And yeah, these are the differences. And I mean, honestly, maybe if I was in the US or if I grew up in the US, I probably would have learned to drive. But just where I live, I just don't want to drive on these roads, man. That is just the grand scheme of it. They're just not it, you know. I don't know, though. Maybe one day. But hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. And yeah, until next time, like, subscribe.